7 little foxes in the twisted antler wood, listening to stories much later than they should. The first flees the teacher with dark, gooey eyes, the second from 6 sisters whose tongues tell lies. The third escapes a woman who peels foxes' skins, the fourth slinks away from the Golga thrush's grin. The fifth wets the ground when he smells Mr. Scratch, the sixth turns tail when the paw finds its match. The 7th little fox in the wood all alone, facing down a ghost beneath branches of bone. One little fox stays the whole night through, but can she make it to the end? Better yet, can you? You can? Then let's begin. Welcome guys, gals, and pals. My name is Brooke, and this is Brooke Beams Big, where I share my expressions of joy. Happy first Scary Saturday. In today's video, I will be reading the Scary Stories for Young Foxes series by Christian McKay Heidicker. Scary Stories for Young Foxes has been on my spooky autumnal TBR for several years, since it was originally released. So long that a second book in the series, The City, has also been released and been out for a couple of years. I love middle grade, and foxes are my favorite animal, so this has always seemed like the perfect book for me for this time of year. I am so pumped to finally be reading these stories and to be taking you along with me. 5 little foxes. This is a little ridiculous, but we're gonna do it anyway, because it's fun. I have now read the first half of Scary Stories for Young Foxes. This book is not quite what I thought it was. It has a narrative frame, which is that 7 little fox kits, who are all siblings, go to a storyteller fox to tell them a scary story. And I thought that he told them separate stories, and that each of the stories is so scary that it scares one of the fox kits away. But the stories he tells are actually connected, you realize after he tells a few of them. While that wasn't what I thought, I am really liking it. And I am really liking the risks he takes with these stories. Usually with middle grade, you don't actually see real true death. And let me tell you, without spoilers, the first story in this does not hold back. None of them hold back. You cannot expect to be safe at all. You do not know what is going to come at you. The writing in this is also beautiful and great at creating a spooky atmosphere and fear. A fearful atmosphere, and there is definitely some nods to some other childhood favorites that involve animal characters, although in a way harsher light than I would have expected. I am never gonna look at Beatrix Potter the same. I actually wanted to do a video on her books at some point in the future, and now I think I'm gonna have to wait a long time before I do that, or I'm just gonna be thinking about this. I can definitely see why it has won the Newbery Honor Award and why this book is so acclaimed. I've just gotten to a part where our 2 main characters here have gotten together at the crux, the middle of the book. Their storylines are converging, so I am very excited to keep reading this and see just how scary these stories get. 4 little foxes. I have now finished Scary Stories for Young Foxes, and I have to say, this is the perfect autumnal spooky book. I've already talked about the no-holds-bar attitude when it comes to the spooky and survival elements. I've already talked about the writing and how great it is at creating the perfect atmosphere for this kind of book. I truly believe that this is an all-ages story, which means it has writing that is both simple enough for young people to understand, to be able to comprehend when reading on their own, but is also rich enough that older people, such as myself, can enjoy it. It has the sort of high stakes that keep it interesting for an older audience while not going so over the top that it becomes inappropriate for children. It also explores a lot of big themes, but in a way that's approachable for children probably because it's told from the perspective of animals. For instance, ableism is a big theme because one of our main two characters is born with a leg that never fully develops, so he basically only has 3 legs, and this is a big plot point in how his family treats him, which is one of the horrific elements of this story. So trigger warnings for that if that is something that bothers you, although they are definitely portrayed as the bad guys. I also think domestic abuse and toxic masculinity are themes that you could definitely say were explored here. I also really appreciated how the ending handled the purpose of telling these stories, how it really boosted the power of oral histories and looks at how we can tell scary stories in order to provide knowledge and to help us through scary times in our own lives. So now it's on to Scary Stories for Young Foxes, The City, the second book in the series. 3 little foxes. You're still here? Then it's time for another scary story for young foxes. A frightened stranger stumbles through the twisted antler wood, wounded deep and mumbling, his paw prints filled with blood. 3 young foxes sniff him out beneath the winter glow. They listen to his gasping tale while sheltered from the snow. A barn holds swaying secrets, hung and dripping from its eaves. A shade plucks boxes from the night, invisible as leaves. The ragged waits for helpless things while grinning in its tomb. A cold machine grinds boxes up and drools them in the gloom. The clicking teeth of hollow hounds resound down empty streets. The ladies smear their faces white and lure kits with their sweets. A figure gathers paws and eyes with nimble rubber hands, and foxes wake to metal scrapes, their limbs pinned down by bands. 3 young foxes knead the ground, uncertain what to do. Will turning tail save your hide when the stories come for you? Let's begin. I'm now a little over halfway through Scary Stories for Young Foxes, The City. This second book really holds up to the first one. It has the same strong writing, the same great storytelling, and the same no-holds-barred, age-appropriate horror. I'm really enjoying it. This story has both familiar elements and new elements. It has that same framing narrative setup where an older fox is telling a story, a scary story, to a group of young fox kits. However, it's different because the fox kits did not go to a storyteller and ask for a story. Rather, they found an injured stranger in the woods and he is telling them what has occurred to him in a very roundabout way. This book also has the 2 narratives that meet up at some point in the story. The first book had Mia and Yuli. This book has Cozy and Julep meeting up with O370, who is later renamed Olio. However, this book has a very different theme. Whereas the first book covered the dangers for foxes living in the wild, in the woods, or wherever, this book really approaches wild animals who live among humans, who live in human settlements, neighborhoods, cities, and what fresh horrors are there for these animals who are trying to survive. So I think that was a really great way to continue this story, to expand this world without getting too repetitive. I also talked about how the first book showed the importance of oral storytelling and oral history, and I really like that that is further explored in this book. While this book has completely new characters, they all have knowledge of the characters in the first book. They all know the stories that we heard in the first book that have been passed down through generations of foxes to help them learn survival skills and to help them learn to face whatever they have to face in life to get through it. And I thought that that was an amazing way to link this book. And there's a lot of nuance with that, because the stories that O370 heard in captivity are tweaked from the stories that the foxes in the wild have heard from their parents because they're trying to show different things with the stories. The stories' bases are the same, but they change things about them to portray different morals. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of look at how stories change over time with culture and with necessity. I'll be back soon to discuss the end of the book. Two little foxes. I have now finished Scary Stories for Young Foxes, The City, and this second installment in the series really holds up to the first one. I believe both of these books are perfect autumnal spooky reads. They have great atmosphere, they have some great scares without being too over the top, but also without holding back. I have a couple of thoughts about this book compared to the first one. Both books involve rabies to some degree, or as the foxes call it, the yellow. In the first book, I really liked its inclusion because I believe that rabies is very scary for all of us, humans and wild animals alike, but I could see how it's especially a fear for wild animals who don't necessarily have an understanding of it and what's happening. It was the opener for the first book, and it was a horrific tale, I will say. When it was included in this book, it felt a little repetitive at first because we had already seen it, and this book was supposed to have new challenges in a new environment. However, this book definitely carried it through the storyline better, in my opinion, and definitely gave like a zombie apocalypse vibe, and I love me a good zombie apocalypse. So I did really enjoy that element, so the inclusion of rabies in this one had a little bit of mixed vibes for me. As I said before, this book has a similar structure to the first book, which helps carry through a sense of familiarity for people who really enjoyed the first book, which I like. Part of that is that both books kind of have this full circle moment from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. And I have to say that with this book, I enjoyed how that was done a lot better. Without giving spoilers and saying what happens, I felt like it was stronger and felt more realistic. With all of that being said, as someone who doesn't seek out scary stories very often, I would highly recommend this series to you. It has great writing, it has great atmosphere, it has great storytelling, it has great characters. It has everything you need to have a great scary Saturday. And until the next one, thank you for joining me on this journey. Like this video if I made you smile, and if you're up to it, comment something that made you happy today, yesterday, or even just this week. I would love to celebrate it with you. That's the end, friends. Sending you off with love. Goodbye. One little fox. Sleep tight, little foxes.